Hey guys, hope your day is going well. Today I wanted to show you how to melt an object in Houdini. As I'm recording this, we're just a couple days away from Easter, so I think it'd be fun to melt a chocolate bunny. You can melt whatever object you want and I'll show you how. To start, let's make a new project. Just called this one Chocolate Bunny Tutorial, and let's save it. Okay, now let's go ahead and create our object. Like I said before, I'll be melting a chocolate bunny. So let me drop down a GeoNode here. Call it bunny. And similar to what we did with the coin imprint from one of my previous tutorials, let's drop down an image of the thing that we'd like to create. So I'll drop down a grid. Make it 2 by 2. Drop down a UV quick shade. Get my image on there. All right, and let's change the perspective view to top. I'm just going to drop down a transform node real quick and rotate this. All right, and now that we have that, let's drop down our curve. And you have to make sure that your handle is on this guy right here in order to do it. Now, just like the coin, the more points that you have, the smoother your object will look. So just kind of take your time. And don't forget to press enter. Let's change the view back to our perspective. And here you can select any points, just kind of edit them however you'd like. Make sure everything's good. And let's drop down a poly extrude. Don't forget to output the back. And make it as thick as you want your object to be. I think I'm going to make an eye on the bunny to give it just a little more detail. So to do that, I'm going to drop down a sphere. Let's make it polygon mesh, just like a really fine. Just so you know, you have the blue flag, which is the display render flag, but you can also do a little template so you can get a nice wireframe of a different node, so then you can compare. So I'm just going to drop down a template on the sphere and model it to the shape of this eye. All right, let's see what it looks like with the bunny. And I'm going to drop down a merge node, and that just combines your two geometries, and that way I can see them both together. And we have our basic bunny shape with an eye. I'm going to transform it so it's standing up. And let's change the perspective to our front. We can just make sure that it's right there on the ground. Okay. Alright, so we have our basic bunny shape, but normally chocolate bunnies have rounded edges. I'm going to drop down a poly bevel. But the poly bevel doesn't really work with the eye, so I'm just going to wire it right in here after our poly extrude. And let's make this smooth. like it. Look at this. That's the cool thing about Houdini, is it's all procedural, and you can always go back and change previous steps. Like, I'm just looking at this, and I think that I want my bunny to be just a little bit thicker, so you can just go back and make it a little bit thicker, and then you can go back and move the eye. Right there. Cool, I like it. So we have our bunny. Let's drop down a null. Now we need to turn this object into particles to make it into a liquid. So I'm going to go to my shelf tools here and click on Melt Object. And down at the bottom you can see Select Object to Melt, click your bunny, press enter. And as you can see, it turned my object into a bunch of particles. And later, these particles are going to be turned into a liquid mesh. So if I hit play right now, it's just going to fall through, because if you remember from last tutorial, we're going to need a ground plane. Now it's just going to sploosh on the floor. But that's not really what we want. We want it to melt from the top, like it's being baked by the sun. So Houdini created these nodes for us when we clicked on this shelf tool. Let's go to our auto dop network. And if you remember from our last tutorial, our dop network is basically our solver that does all the computing for us. It's our simulation. So we're going to be introduced to this jumble of mess. Just press the key L and that'll organize everything for you. And a couple of the key points I wanted to show you guys without getting too complicated here. Right here is our flip object, and up here is the particle separation. Now, a basic rule of thumb for particle separation is the lower the number, the more particles you're going to have, and the better your simulation will look, and the longer it will take to simulate. And so let me refer to you down here on our timeline right here. Do you see this blue bar? That's what's already been processed. That's already, the computer doesn't have to simulate this anymore because it's already been temporarily saved. And if we click on it forward, right here, it has to get up to that frame. The computer has to simulate it. So we have to wait. So for our coin flipping, we didn't really need to worry about this because it wasn't that complicated of a simulation, so it didn't take that long to process it. It was pretty much instantaneous. But your computer is going to have to calculate all of these particles, so it takes a little bit longer. The larger your particle separation, the less time it takes for this to cook, basically. There's a couple of parameters right here I wanted to show you. As you noticed, it just melts right away. And to basically solidify these particles, we want our temperature to be 0. And we also want a really high viscosity to make it really thick. Let's see how 10,000 is. See how it's just solid, but I can still see a couple particles just moving just a little bit. Let's just add another 0. All right, that is a solid chocolate bunny. Another thing I wanted to show you to make your DOP cooking a little bit quicker is, do you see this box around your simulation? Everything in this box is being processed, and we can reduce the size of this box to make our cooking go by a little bit faster. So if you click on your flip solver, you'll see this box, and we can shrink this box so then it's less area that this has to cook. So we have our bunny. Now we want it to start melting from the top. To do that, we're going to have to create a heat source. The easiest way I found to do it is to drop down a geometry, and we will name this heat source. And let's drop down a sphere. Let's make it 50 rows, 50 columns. And we're going to raise it up above the bunny, just right above. And let's add a mountain node. And what the mountain node does is just creates a bunch of noise. And you can mess with the parameters here. Just makes it really bumpy. So then as it's passing through the bunny, it doesn't seem like just a smooth ball is going through it. Make sure that it's completely over the bunny. Let's drop down a transform. And make it just a little bit bigger. Okay, that looks good to me. Now I'm going to keyframe the y-axis at frame 1, alt left click, and about halfway through our simulation, we'll do it 120. Oh, hey, this is another good lesson. So do you see when I clicked on 120, it's just going to start cooking for all that time? If I don't want to wait for that, because I don't need to see my simulation right now, you can hit escape, cancel out of that. And do you see this brain right here? If you click on that, so there's this disable sign, that means that it won't simulate. That means I don't want you to cook anything. But then our bunny disappears. So let's just click on this display flag of our bunny right now. Go through here. And at 120, I want my sphere, my heat source, to pass through almost all the way. And alt left click. So now my heat source is going to slowly move down the bunny. Come back up. Let's uncheck that. Let's click on our brain. Let's save, because it's always good practice to save. Now let's turn this into a heat source. So I'm going to go up here in my viscous fluids, click on heat with an object, and it's going to say, what object do you want to heat with? So I'm going to select this, press enter. What fluid do you want to heat? And I'm going to click on my bunny, press enter. So it turned into this cloud looking object, and it added a node to our DOP network called heating volume. And the one thing that you kind of want to pay attention here is the output range. Basically, the higher this output range is, the faster it's going to melt your liquid. And I did this once before, and one seems to make it look like melted chocolate. If you want it to be really water-like, I would raise this up more, but one seems to work for melting chocolate. So let's just sit through this and let it cook and see what it looks like. Okay, we're all done. And there's a couple things I wanted to point out. As you see, our particles right now are black. And as our heat source passes through it, to represent the temperature, it turns it from red to yellow to white. And white means that the temperature is really hot, and that makes our particles start to melt. You can see it flops down. I like the way that's looking, but if you want to change a couple things, I would go to this flip solver, and let's increase the substeps. What substeps are is you have your frames, and the simulation does a process each frame, but your substeps are processes in between each frame to make it look smoother. So from frame 1 to frame 2, instead of one process, it does it at 1.5 and then 2. And it just makes your simulation look smoother, but the better you want your simulation to look, the longer it's going to take to cook. If you want it to be thicker, you could consider increasing the viscosity and the density. Like I mentioned before, if you want the heating source to really melt your particles and turn them water-like, you could increase the output range. So since I'm pretty happy with how this looks, I'm going to decrease my particle separation now, something like 0.8. but you can do it lower. Do you see how there's a lot more particles in this now? So I think we have our simulation how we like it. Let's go up one level and turn off our ground plane, and we can turn off our heat source. It's still going to be there, we just won't see it, and we don't want to see it. Now let's go to this geometry right here called bunny fluid. And there's a lot to unpack here, but basically what this does is turns your particles into a particle fluid surface, like a mesh, so it looks more like liquid instead of just a bunch of particles moving down. One thing to touch on here is, do you remember how we talked about cooking your simulation and waiting for this timeline to go, and it takes forever, especially when your particle separation is low and you have all these extra sub-steps? If you know that it's what you want, then you can cache it so it saves that simulation forever, so it will just always play. You don't have to rechange it. Obviously, if you do want to change something afterwards, you're going to need to cache it again. But what I would do now is, let's go to this compressed cache right here, and I'm just going to name this compressed. And it's basically, at first it's going to cache a compressed version of our simulation, and then we'll go to the next step after we cache this compressed version of our simulation. Okay, so now that we cached the compressed version of our simulation, we can kind of see what it looks like if we hit the display flag right here. And do you see how it's all blocky right now? If you click on the load from disk, it's just going to pull the saved simulation, so you don't have to recook it every time. Now, let's check out the particle fluid surface. So if you hit the display fluid surface, you'll see that it's made this fluid mesh out of our chocolate bunny, and it's looking pretty good. One thing that I would recommend checking out is clicking on this node and going to the filtering tab. And here you can change a couple things, like making it smoother, adding a final smooth. You can change any sort of parameters right here, like median value, Gaussian mean value. I'm just going to check all these, and it's looking like a pretty good chocolate bunny to me. So let's save this now. If we click on the display flag here, and I'll just call this like surface cache. And this is going to take a little while as well. Okay, now that we've cached our simulation completely, click this load from disk and click on real time, and we can just watch our fluid hopefully melt like a real chocolate bunny should. Love it. Now, all we have to do is make our simulation look pretty. So let's drop down a floor. I'm going to use a circle. You can use a grid or whatever you'd like. Just make that bigger. We have our floor. Now let's drop down a background. And I'll make this into a grid. And we can make a camera. So now let's make a camera. If you hold the control and left click on your camera, it's just going to make a camera pointing exactly where your viewport camera is facing right now. So you'll see that we have these transform handles here and a drop down a camera node for us. Let's go through our simulation, see kind of what it, get a nice angle here. And let me turn this background. We have our background, we have our table. And I'm actually going to animate the camera just a little bit here. I want it to slowly pan away from the bunny because an animated camera is always more interesting than a stationary one. So I'm going to Alt and left click on the translate and the rotate on frame 1. And then let's go do frame 240 and just pan out just a little bit. Alt click, left click, Alt left click. So we have our camera set up. Let's add a light. I'm going to use an environment light. I have a nice outdoorsy HDRI that I'm going to use. And let's make it a little bit brighter. 2. So now let's apply our shaders. It just so happens that Houdini already has a milk chocolate. Just click and drag that to our bunny. Let's make a shader for our table and make a shader for our background. And I'd like to do some nice springy colors. Maybe a green. Let's see what that looks like. Well, no, I don't like, let's do like a blue. And we'll make the background the green. Maybe. Okay, let's see what this looks like in our render view. All right, and if you want it to just render a section, hold the Shift key, left click and drag the box on what you do want to render, and it'll be a little quicker because there's not really any point of rendering this background. The green is looking a bit neon to me. It's not really reading spring, so I'm going to change that. Maybe a little darker. But I am liking the look of that a lot. Go to our scene view. And cool, I think we're ready to render this bad boy. So let's go to our out. Our mantra node, rendering. I'm just going to do a 9x9. Change this to physically based rendering. You can change any of these that you want. Maybe a good idea would to be your subsurface scattering, to increase that because of the milk chocolate has a little bit of subsurface scattering on it. The default shader does anyways. Maybe you might want to increase your reflection on the ground. But other than that, I think we're ready to render this. So we can just go to render to disk. And I think that should be all for me today, guys. Thanks for watching, and please let me know if you have any suggestions or if you are an expert in Houdini. If you have any better ways of doing this, I'm always open to learn more. That's the main reason why I'm doing these tutorials, is to learn more myself, and the best way for me to learn is through teaching. So if you have any suggestions, please let me know. And if you're a beginner, let me know your thoughts as well. Is there anything that I wasn't clear on that you'd want to learn more about, or did I do a good enough job explaining on how I went about creating this simulation? Just any feedback is appreciated, and I hope you all have a hippity hoppity Easter. Bye!